Rob Nelson, talk show host.
Because you got the 70s thing going there. I got someone's underwear.
Robert Kennedy, thanks for taking a minute. Simple question.
Tucker?
It's good to see you. Listen,
You're a Bitcoin maximalist. You're Bitcoin forever.
I hate this central bank digital currency.
Hey, I don't have all the answers, but together, I know we can find them.
Hey everybody, Merry Christmas Eve. Yeah, I'm doing a Christmas Eve show. I know. Be all 10 of you watching. No, but I figured it's worth it. You know, wrap up the end of the we're heading to the end of the year, wrap it up. You know, there's something about Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is special. Christmas is a special holiday. Hanukkah's just ended. What's troubling how much violence we're seeing over all the holidays, right? I mean, the first night of Hanukkah, you know, Festival of Lights, you have this, you know, Bondi Beach shooting. That's the anti-Semitism, the anti-Christian stuff going. It's not as much in the U.S., but around the world, there's so much anti-Christian hatred and persecution going on. And even in our country, like it's Christians get dumped on, you know, especially a lot of the woke like to kind of make fun of them. People on the left like to mock Christians. Not that there aren't plenty of people who are Democrats and Christians, but there's a sort of tendency to make fun of them. Kind of the Hillary Clinton mindset of sort of mocking people, even though she was technically a Christian, but kind of mocking the middle of America. And, you know, again, there's Catholics, there's evangelicals, there's, you know, more traditional Protestants. But you know, the idea that anybody gets mocked for their faith, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindi, it doesn't matter. I mean, everybody's got a right to their own faith and to pursue it however they most want, which brings me to something that happened last week, and I didn't get a chance to get to it before now, but it's still worth it. Vivek Ramaswamy, the former presidential candidate and currently a gubernatorial candidate in Ohio, who spoke at AmFest, USA Turning Point USA's America Fest last Friday. So, you know, 5 days ago. It was interesting what he said. He encouraged conservatives to embrace ideals and not, quote, lineage. And I want to get into that because there's a whole trend happening in the conservative parts of the conservative movement that is very lineage based, very blood and soil based. So, you know, let me just sort of run through what Ramaswamy said. He sort of talked about the woke left and the race and identity vision, the race identity politics. And you can see how much that race and identity literally defines so much of everything in the mainstream politics of the left. To the point of a Kamala Harris literally arguing that her race, her gender identity, literally cost her an election. And she refused to take a vice presidential candidate, Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania, because she was afraid his race and identity, white man, Jewish, would work against the ticket. So on the one hand, she declined someone she thought was most qualified, thinking that identity would work against the ticket. Yet their whole party's based on identity. So thus it makes sense. She feared too much identity. Black woman, Jewish man. Well, we'll get in trouble. I better just go get some Midwestern governor who's a total goofball stooge because, you know, he'll win us the votes. The guy was a joke. Shapiro might have pushed her to win, but she couldn't. Because her own race politics, identity politics. And then she thinks she lost because she's a black woman. Kamala Harris, we all know, did not lose the election because she's a black woman. She didn't lose the election because she's a black or a woman. She lost the election. I mean, there aren't pockets of people who wouldn't vote for a woman or a black woman. We're going to get to that, hopefully, before this half hour is over. Some of the 1770s and the founders. But she was a horrible candidate. She was a horrible vice president. She was a horrible candidate for presidency. She couldn't win anything in the primaries. She got bounced out. The party surrounded themselves around Joe Biden, I'm talking 2020, and they scooped her in to grab black votes, bring a black woman in. She was a horrible candidate. She's a horrible speaker. She's a pathetic leader. She's not a leader. She doesn't lead. She has no vision. And even when she finally got handed the mantle, first picked to be vice president, then picked to replace the president and be the candidate for the presidency, she couldn't differentiate a single thing she'd do different. That's how little vision and leadership she had. But she lost because of her identity, because of her race. That's the race identity politics that the woke left embraces, and it's killing them. It's destroying their party. It's just it eats itself from the inside out. However, what Ramaswamy was addressing was that that's true, but there are parts of what he called the online right who link American identity very much to heritage. And if you think about it, and you've heard these people, if you think about it, and he says, I think the idea of a heritage American is about as loony as anything the woke left has actually put up. There's no American who's more American than somebody else. It's binary. Either you're American or you're not. Now, heritage Americans, it's tricky. Heritage Americans are making an argument that is identity based. It's blood and soil based, but no different than race identity based when you think about it. It's a similar, two different pockets of the same kookiness. The blood and soil American, you from here, is a myth. Now, again, you could trace pieces of that back to the revolution because, well, yes and no, right? The blood and soil Americans were colonists, but they're all from Britain. Well, they weren't all from Britain for that matter. I mean, they were from all over Europe, right? I mean, that was part of the craziness of the colonies, you know? You had like the Germans, like the Swedish, the British, you know, I mean, they were all British colonies, but you had peoples from these different ethnic groups who made up different colonies, or predominantly made up parts of different colonies. And they have very different cultures. They even spoke differently. They have very different customs even amongst them, right? So the only common blood and soil, I think, to the Patriots was you live in the colonies and you come from Britain. In some cases, you came from France because the French allied with the Patriots. But, you know, you could live here, you could be blood and soil to Britain. And you know, if you were a loyalist and you supported the king after the revolution started, the colonists, the patriots, viewed you as the worst thing in the world. They tormented them. They burned their houses to the ground. They chased them out of towns. They beat them, tarred and feathered, all kinds of stuff. I'm horrible, super violent, because they were loyal to the king. So they were literally the same people. He divided not on blood and soil, but on an allegiance to something, to one government or to a new forming government. And you know, and Ramaswamy's point is it's the ideals that define what makes you an American, not your lineage, not your blood and soil roots. What does it mean to be an American in 2026? It means we believe in those ideals of 1776. We believe in merit, best person in the job, regardless of their skin color. It means we believe in speech, open debate, even from those who disagree with us. And he names Nick Fuentes to Jimmy Kimmel, two very different, by the way. But he says, you know, the far left and far right can be very similar here, and that there's no room in the conservative movement for racial quotas, but also for those who rationalize hatred toward any group of people, specifically, you know, say a white nationalist like Nick Fuentes, for their inflammatory remarks. And you know, he says victimhood from either side, right or left, will be kind of the ruin of America. Now, this all came from a piece that he wrote in the New York Times, which he argued that the right was divided into two camps: a blood and soil, and they were incompatible. Identity obsessed outlook and one based on ideals. So blood and soil, identity obsessed, no different than the woke left, just on the right side of it, and one based on American ideals. Now, there's a sub point under this for me, because I've argued the populist right and the populist left in America have a lot more in common than different. And even to some extent, I would argue that Mandami, governor, the mayor-elect Mandami, is a populist, and Donald Trump is a populist. They're very different. One's a right populist, one's a left populist. But I think their shared thing is that they're both populists. And I've said right populism, left populism will have a lot in common. So true will right identity politics and left identity politics. You're both going to base it on identity, one racial quotas and gender identity on the left, the woke left, but on the right, a different kind of racial identity built around white blood and soil heritage. And Ramaswamy in his piece in the Times said, no matter your ancestry, if you wait and become a citizen here, you're as American as anyone off the Mayflower. And that is true. And I believe our founding fathers intended that to be true. As long as you subscribe to the sort of the creed of America and the founding, and then the culture was born on it, that's what makes American exceptionalism possible. That idea, American exceptionalism, the idea of what sets us apart. First, the founding of our country sets us apart. There was no government like it in the world. There were monarchies. I'm not the world's greatest historian. And I don't know if there were, certainly, even you go back to ancient Greece, there was forms of democratic citizenship. But you had emperors and, I guess Greece, had a version of it. But there'd never been a government like what the founding fathers crafted up. And as I said before, I don't think they even started out intending to. The opportunity, the seeds of democracy were birthed in what they were doing, which was really to get the British foot off their neck and give them autonomy. And in the beginning would have settled for a good deal, like stop overtaxing us, stop doing this to us, let us get a standing army off our soil here, and we'll be good. But then it went too far. And democracy emerged from that. And then they weren't making it up as they went along. As I said before, George Washington, like him or don't like him, a lot of things not to like about him, but he single-handedly made the most powerful statement. I've said this before. He resigned his military commission. Who does that? When you're the general, the commanding general that just beat the biggest, toughest army in the world, this is the biggest navy on the planet, you just beat the empire? You don't resign your military, you don't resign, you don't give up your military ranking, or you don't hand it in. You hold on to it and its power. He didn't want it. Then they made him president, and he didn't want to be a king, and he didn't want to serve more than 2 terms, and he wanted to move it on. Gave up. I don't remember who it was, but I don't know if it was Thomas Paine or John Adams or who, but there's a great quote where it basically says, in that singular act, those two singular acts, Jefferson set a standard of statesmanship and of new kind of governance that had never existed in the world. Walking away from resigning his military commission, and then refusing to be a king and refusing to remain in office as a president past 2 elected terms. It's remarkable. This is what the founding fathers were building, whether they knew it fully or not. And I've said, and I've been hypercritical of the founding fathers for their hypocrisy around slavery and indigenous peoples, the Indians here, but really around slavery. They carefully crafted out a way to make slaves 3/4 of a person. They used fancy language at different ways, to try to sort of suggest that they weren't going against what they were saying, that all men were created equal. At one point they had in a line, and maybe it was in like the Pennsylvania Constitution, but like if they're a part of in the state of society, so slaves wouldn't count. But they knew what they were doing. They knew that they were essentially allowing it. And at one point Jefferson had said, written this whole early draft in which he totally trashed the king for bringing slaves into the colonies to start with and setting this horrible, inhumane indignity in motion. Yet he had hundreds of slaves. And he had kids with Sally Hemingway. And he didn't free most of his slaves after his death. And he didn't even free Sally Hemingway after his death. He freed their kids, which he said he would do. The kids of his slave and him, he freed after his death. He didn't even free her. And yet he thought slavery was this absolutely, horrible, immoral act. And he did it. And Washington did it. Adams didn't do it, but he wasn't fighting for abolition early on. He thought it was abhorrent. Abigail Adams thought it was an absolute, utter moral hypocrisy. She would write. She's a brilliant writer. That there's nothing that the South in the Southern colonies, the battle for liberty was a joke. For them to suggest they were fighting for these ideals of liberty when they had an entire culture built on repressing people and holding them enslaved in enslaved states, in enslaved states, meaning their status was enslaved. They were enslaved humans. And yet they were fighting for these ideals of liberty. She's like, it's the most utter hypocritical joke in the world. But her husband was like, yeah, well, let's just, we got to make this work. So let's not try to abolish the whole thing today. It's utter hypocrisy. But that didn't mean they weren't right about the ideals that they set out in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, And even the very line, the inalienable rights, I should look it up. I mean, it's just such a remarkable sense of what they saw. And originally they talked about it as divine rights, and they were trying to separate trying to separate the divine part from the logical part. Inalienable rights that were there, and sure. Right then, they had a smaller group of people they allowed them to cover, but we've expanded that and expanded that and expanded that. And you can't expand it if you go identity politics either way. If you go identity politics to the left, you're not expanding it. But you go identity politics to the right, that blood and soil stuff, it's the same racist math. Same racist math. It's racism on the right, racism on the left. And you see this going from Israel protectionism, the Charlie Kirk stuff, the Kansas Owens, Ben Shapiro being a critic of Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, the whole conspiratorial thing that's underlying everything right now. We're in wacky times. Wacky times. So what do Americans want on this Christmas Eve? Well, I checked out some polling. Most Americans, now granted, you can look up whichever poll you want. This happens to be CNN's poll of polls. But, and I don't put endless belief in polls, but good polling does give you indicators. And I think most polls are showing a similar thing. Most Americans' primary concern is cost of living, economic cost of living concerns. That's their number one, Democrats and Republicans. And then in between, there's, people who want Trump to resign and people who want the Democrats to stand up to Trump more and all that stuff. But essentially, almost everybody, 4 in 10 Americans, don't think anybody's listening to them, Democrats or Republicans. So that means even the partisan loyalists on left and right, out of everyone, 40% of the country. So you can have the diehard lefties and the diehard Trumpers. 40% of people think neither leadership is listening to them. That's a lot. Only 34% of all U.S. adults think Trump actually, cares what they have to say. And they only, 36%, 2% more think the Democratic leadership does. So you got two parties in leadership right now where the vast majority of Americans, a significant majority, let's just say that, of Americans, think that neither party is listening to their concerns, and they are worried about economics and affordability. This one number caught me. 5% across parties said that Trump should be focusing on immigration. And yet that's all they do. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, most people who are aligned with Democrats don't actually think they align with what the Democratic Party to them seems to stand for. This more ultra wokeist thing, right? So where does that leave us? Again, two fractured parties, fractured within themselves, bulwarked up against each other, both in a spinning state of denial, and the average American going, none of you are listening to me. Trump can ride this out. He's president for 3 more years and done. he'll leave his mark, and he's going to leave his mark in world foreign policy and immigration. And in long term, I think his tariff policies, I've said before, I think are genius, and I think they will bolster enormous amount of growth in the U.S. long-term GDP, manufacturing, bringing back jobs. I think there's going to be a lot there. But in the midterms, Republicans are going to get clobbered if they don't listen, if they don't hear. And if Trump just keeps saying there's not a problem, things aren't as expensive as you think, the economy's never been better, he's doing Joe Biden, and all you on the right have to have the willingness to be, well, you don't have to do anything, but you're hypocrites if you can't go, this is what we said about Joe Biden when he ignored the numbers. Now Trump's ignoring the same numbers, and he's not ignoring them. Of course he is. Nobody wants to say the numbers are bad. No, they're not maybe as bad, but they're still bad for most people. Things are too expensive. Life is too costly. Health insurance premiums are about to go. I'm not a fan of the Obamacare subsidies, but they're about to go out of control. Health care on loans, astronomical. Food, way too expensive. Cars, still way too expensive. Housing, most young people can't even think about buying a house. I mean, the cost of life in America is expensive for most people. And most of the spending's been driven by those who are wealthier. That's what we know from looking at the data. There's a certain amount of middle-class spending, but a lot of what's driven the economy has been people with a lot of money spending a lot of money. Okay, third thing for today. Ukraine, Russia. This one hasn't gone away, although it's bounced off our radar, but no better time than Christmas to talk about peace. Zelensky, there was a 28-point agreement that got squished down to 20 points. And Zelensky outlined what he said would be an acceptable compromise. This is the other day. To get troops out of the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. That's sort of the main area, the Donetsk region. I mean, apparently they call it the Fortress Belt because it's a bunch of fortified Ukrainian cities that keep Russia from getting deeper into the heart of Ukraine. Putin wants that. He wants all of Donetsk. I'll say wrong. Donestk. Donetsk. I'm getting it. I don't think they're going to succeed all of Donetsk to Russia because Russia would literally have nothing in its way. But I will give Zelensky credit. He said he's willing to basically withdraw a demilitarized zone, withdraw back, and Russia has to do the same. There's a giant demilitarized zone on the current front lines. And then, of course, acknowledge Ukraine's sovereignty and a non-aggression agreement between them. Now, he wants security guarantees from the U.S. and Europe. That means NATO. And he wants essentially the mirror of an Article 5. So that's an interesting one because that's the cornerstone principle of NATO, right? Article 5, do to me and do to my neighbor, do to my ally, you're doing to me, right? It's essentially a mutual self-defense pact. And it would require sanctions and a military response if Russia were to reinvade Ukraine. Nothing if Ukraine acts first. That's a tricky one. We'll see about that. I mean, it's essentially what NATO provides. It's just not NATOing it. It's just saying we'll take the Article 5 piece. And then they want an economic recovery package, a robust one, a Ukraine development fund for tech, data centers, and AI, and their natural gas sector. And by the way, Zelensky's smart, invest in the natural gas sector with U.S. companies. He says that they feel like they've lost about $800 billion. But, again, Trump's no dummy. He sees economic opportunity here. And then a compromise on the nuclear power plant, which Russia right now holds. But it would be a U.S.-Ukrainian operation. 50% of the energy goes to Ukraine. The rest gets allocated by the U.S. Then it's a legally binding agreement guaranteed by a peace council chaired by U.S. President Donald J. Trump. It's smart, though, when you think about it. Zelensky's no dummy either. He knows. Meanwhile, he's got problems at home like crazy. People, that government's so corrupt. It has been corrupt. What a twisted circle, right? When Trump went after him, remember, when they impeached him because he threatened to withhold aid if they didn't give up the dirt on Biden and the attempt to that they were clearly covering up, protecting the Biden interests. And then they impeached him, right? Comes full circle now, right? Biden's long gone. Clearly there was shenanigans going on. Zelensky's in a war with Russia. Trump's the one that can save the day. He holds the money. He's also bringing in the U.S. investment, but he's also the master of the peace process for everybody. Can't make it up. You can't make it up. Remember that if you forgot. That impeachment was because Zelensky said, we're going to withhold some aid if you don't get to the bottom of what's going on here with Burisma and Big Joe and the Biden family, because I think it's dirty politics, and I want the dirt. Got an impeachment on that one, but there he is. Trump just survives it all. The lesson about Trump is he just well, if you hate him, you think he's a cockroach that won't go away, or you could see he's a representation of somebody who never ever quits. It's like Tom Brady, just never stops fighting, never stops going, never gives up on what he wants to do, never lets the attacks be stronger than his will and determination to do it. And I will say this. In this way, Donald Trump is a remarkable patriot in a certain way. That's what the founding fathers did. That's what George Washington did with the militias, with the patriots, with the rebel army against the British. He never quit. He just never quit. He never let them wear him down too far. He's just like, just stay alive. Just stay alive a little longer. Get a little more money. Keep the troops together a little longer. He pleaded. He begged. Just don't bail out yet. We just have to. We outlast them. We will win. We don't have to literally beat Britain. We just got to wear Britain out to where Britain loses to us. And that's what happened. And then we win. Yeah, the idea was we don't have to have a total victory, but it's a total loss for Britain if they don't have a total victory. And it was. It's a massive loss for Britain on a political level, on an economic level, just on an emotional level. Like, the U.S. just had to survive it. The colonies just had to survive, and they did. They outlasted it. They wouldn't quit. Washington figured out how to just keep things going, keep people in the game. Trump does that, and it's kind of a remarkable thing. He just stays in the game. Just keeps going. That's an adversary you want to be a little scared of. But I bring it all back through Zelensky to peace, which I think is what Trump wants to be remembered for most. Peace, proving he did what he said about immigration. You know my views on that. It's Christmas Eve. I think we've gone way too far. I don't think we need to be as extreme about it as we're being. But we do need to be as extreme having the border. And we do need to absolutely start moving people out, and especially people here more recently. But I said before, for those who've been here a long time, productive citizens, let's just give them a path. And I think we will. I mean, I think we will find that balance, that common ground, I think will happen in the next couple of years. I could be wrong. But on the eve of Christmas, it's a time for, other than it's a big materialistic holiday where everybody makes a lot of money, spends a lot of money. I mean, and some people make a lot of money and everybody wants gifts and presents. Other than that, there's a real significance to it. It's a day of, a time where really to kind of reflect on what you have to be grateful for life, for family, for friends, for the opportunities. And as an American, what extraordinary opportunities we have. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. The gifts that we've been given in this country. I was going to read, but something before I go, but I'm not because I can't find it. So I won't. But I will just say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal. And it's taken us a long time to get there, to see that equality, and we're still working at it. But race identity on either side, left or right, which includes the blood and soil heritage argument, the white nationalist stuff. No, that's not what they meant by all men are created equal. I know they certainly ignored the slave question, but it took us a long time. And as a nation, we faced it. It will always be a stain and a blemish, and we will always have to do some accounting for that. But we've come a long way, baby, as they like to say. And Kamala Harris, you didn't lose because you're a black woman. You lost because you were a terrible candidate. And we will see a black woman president, or a black man president, or a woman president of some kind. But it's not because one day people will be ready for it. It's because the right candidate will emerge with the right sense of ideals and vision for the future of this country. And again, it's not going to my mind, be someone in a bifurcated extreme left or right. You know, it's going to be somebody who represents the best and the most and the all of what America is and can be. Merry Christmas, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.
Meet Rob Nelson, talk show host.
Because you got the 70s thing going there. I got someone's underwear.
Robert Kennedy, thanks for taking a minute. Simple question.
Tucker?
It's good to see you. Listen,
You're a Bitcoin maximalist. You're Bitcoin forever.
I hate this central bank digital currency.
Hey, I don't have all the answers, but together